I've owned a lot of gear, and I mean a lot of gear. As my life as a guitarist, I have gone through tons of guitars, amps, pedals. I've bought more and traded more than I can honestly think of. And one piece of gear that I can't imagine living without is my Kemper Profiler. The Kemper is single-handedly the most incredible, versatile, best all-in-one rig that I can think of. In one amp, I can have amp tones ranging from Fender, Vox, Matchless, Tyler, Classic Dumble, etc. I can have effects that sound on par with some of the companies such as Strymon, Boss, or Empress. And now with the new enhancement, I can have overdrives that go from crystal clean Klon tones to OCD to Blues Breaker to King of Tone. All of that is inside of the Kemper. Now, it's not all rainbow and sunshine with the Kemper. Now, there are some dislikes, which I'll get to later on in this video, but I do have to say that the pros far outweigh the cons. Now, in this video, I want to break down why the Kemper Profiler has been my go-to rig over the last 3 years. Now, of course, I'll give you some of my dislikes here at the end of the video as well. And then lastly, before we get started, I actually made a very similar video to this as well, which I'll go ahead and link up to the top. Okay, let's go ahead, let's get started. So why did I choose the Kemper? Well, before owning the Kemper, I actually landed on a few different amps. I played through a Black Star for several years. I owned a couple of deluxe reverbs. I played through a Dr. Z Moz 18. I even owned the Helix as well. And even though those all sounded great, at the time I was looking for something that I knew would be a much more convenient option to haul between shows, which I was playing pretty regularly, and then also between worship as well. Now, at the time, I knew I was looking for an all-in-one solution, such as the Kemper, a Helix, Fractal. I just didn't really know the direction that I wanted to go. And honestly, the reason I landed on the Kemper was, one, because of the user interface I felt like was a lot simpler than the Fractal. And then, to be frank, I think the amp tones within the Kemper do sound better than the Helix. Now, at the time when I bought it, Kemper had just released their new reverbs and delays. And so at this point, they were pretty comparable to the Helix. I think for a while, the Helix definitely sounded a lot better on that front. But overall, as far as an all-in-one solution, I thought the Kemper was the way to go. Now, I ended up finding a pretty sweet deal on the head, the foot switch, and then an FR cab for right about 2,500 bucks. And basically, when I first received the Kemper, there was a pretty big learning curve. At least initially, I was honestly kind of worried that I made a mistake because the initial profiles that were inside of the Kemper weren't great. And I think this is something that you'll hear, especially if you're watching a ton of other videos, is that the Kemper sounds great when you have great profiles. That's what's honestly going to make or break this amp. Flash forward a couple of weeks, and by this point I actually went and I bought some profile packs from Selah Sounds, Tone Junkies. I bought some performances from Worship Tutorials, and my tone honestly had never sounded better. Every show, my amp sounded the same. Every time I plugged in, I knew exactly what to expect without having to worry about the hassle of cables or cranking a tube amp, stage volume, whatever it may be. Now, that's a pretty condensed version of my history with the Kemper Profiler, and honestly, for the remainder of this video, what I really want to do is just break down why I love this amp so much and why it's kind of been my go-to rig for the last 3 years. Reason number one is the consistency. I love being able to plug in my guitar and get the exact same sound no matter what, no matter where. The issue when I had a tube amp was I was always concerned with whether or not my tubes were warm enough, whether or not I had all my pedals in the right settings as last time I had them, if there's going to be too much humidity in the room and it's just going to change how the amp or the cab sounds overall. And now with the Kemper, no matter what, I plug it in and I get the exact same sound every single time. That's super refreshing for me. It allows for more opportunity just to play my guitar or just to search for cool tones than have to worry about finding a tone that I lost or I can't find again. Reason number 2 is that the tones are incredible. Now, I'm really picky when it comes to my gear, my sound, and different things like that. And honestly, the Kemper just sounds amazing. And it feels like an amp too. When I'm playing a Kemper, when I'm playing an amp, I don't really notice a difference as far as how I actually play my instrument. I also love the control parameters where you can go in depth and control the EQ on an amp, or you can control the definition, which is probably one of my favorite things to do within an amp. If you ever find a profile where maybe it's a little muddy or it doesn't sound great with single coils, or you want it to sound a little better with humbuckers, if you can adjust that definition, it's going to give a little bit more brilliance to that profile. And it's something that you can't do with a real amp, but honestly makes such a huge difference within the Kemper. And it's one of those really cool things that just open up a world of different opportunities. Reason number 3, which is pretty similar to reason number 2, is that the onboard effects sound absolutely amazing as well. Now, the reason I love this and the reason I think this is a separate point is reason number 2 is the amp itself sounds great. You can use the Kemper and then use a separate board or separate effects or whatever you want. However, I use the Kemper where I'm using the amp and then all the onboard effects, and then I'm using my foot switch to control that. I think all of the parameters and the effects inside of the Kemper sound absolutely amazing. And now with their most recent updates and enhancements, you have better sounding reverbs, delays. Now we have overdrives that are much more versatile. So again, I think rather than having to lug around a huge pedal board, the effects inside of the Kemper are a super viable solution. Reason number 4 is I love how convenient this amp is to carry around. Now, again, when I purchased this, I was gigging quite a bit more than I am now, and right now the only thing I'm really doing is going to rehearsal on Thursdays and playing on Sunday mornings. Again, though, being able to just grab my amp, put it in a bag or a backpack, and just carry it with me with my guitar and not have to make multiple trips or have a cart where I'm carrying an 80-pound amp and my pedal board and my guitar is honestly super nice. Nobody really likes to carry around super heavy gear, and so I can actually go ahead, I'll link in the description the bag that I use, but it's a Gator Transit series bag. Basically everything I need fits in one bag. So the actual head, the foot switch, tons of room for cables. You also have the ability to have like a volume pedal or something else in there, and then I even have my wireless unit in the bag as well. Reason number 5 is I really like Kemper as a company. Now, although they aren't perfect, one thing that I really appreciate is that we have the same hardware as we did 12 or 13 years ago. The only thing that's changed is the software updates, and basically what that means to me is that they've created such a great piece of technology. We don't constantly need a Kemper 2.0, 3.0, and so forth. Again, kind of one of my beefs with Fractal is that that's kind of what they've done, and they sound amazing and there is reason to create new versions, but I think at least for the Kemper for now, a lot of their initial issues were solved with these different firmware updates. Reason number 6 why I love the Kemper is because I think it's a pretty intuitive interface. Now, of course, I've owned this now for quite a while, so I've definitely gotten used to it, but at least on the front end, yes, there is a learning curve, but I think it's less steep than some of the other digital modelers, amp modelers out there. Now that might be a turn off for you personally, where if you really want to dive in deep and you want to control every possible parameter like the Fractal allows for, or the Helix maybe allows for, or being able to have 2 different signal chains and different things like that, that's where some of those amps or those modelers are going to shine. Whereas the Kemper is, in my opinion, a little bit more simple on that front. I like that. Again, I think that gives me more time just to plug in and play, but that's something to keep in mind if this is an amp that you're looking at. Reason number 7 is just the ease of recording. I can just grab a couple of XLRs, plug them in, go stereo to my audio interface, or grab a couple 1/4-inch cables and record that way. Now, one of my dislikes with the Kemper is that the audio interface is not built into the Kemper. Not a huge deal. You can buy a cheap audio interface for 50 to 100 bucks, but you can obviously spend a lot more on interfaces as well. Now, I think this is kind of a downfall within the Kemper because Helix, Fractal, some of the other digital modelers as well already have this built in, so you can just take that unit, plug it right into your DAW, and then just start recording. Lastly, reason number 8, and this is kind of a petty one, is I just think it looks cool, right? It's that Kemper green, it's that kind of toaster look, looks almost retro and kind of futuristic, but just looks sweet. And in a live situation where you can customize the LED lights, it's really cool, it stands out, and something that I really like just having on stage with me. Okay, now let's talk dislikes. I've given you a pretty comprehensive list of why I really love the Kemper. However, there are a couple things that I really struggle with as well. Reason number 1 is I think we're kind of at the mercy of product enhancements and updates from Kemper. Their team is much smaller in comparison to, say, Line 6, right, for the Helix. And so because of that, I think we have to wait a little bit longer if there are big updates and different things like that the community is wanting. Not a huge deal because they do listen and they do grant people what they want. And again, all of those updates and firmware updates are free. So you pay for the Kemper and then you get all of the enhancements that we've had so far. So not a huge deal, but again, just something to be aware of. Now, reason number 2, and this is kind of a unique one, and maybe if you're somebody watching this video and you've owned the Kemper for a while yourself, the Kemper kind of has a unique sound to it. I don't quite know how to put my finger on it. I don't really know how to articulate it perfectly, but the Kemper kind of sounds like a Kemper. I don't know if it's something kind of within the higher frequencies or just the way that it profiles amps, but it does have a unique sound to it. Not a huge deal because honestly in a live setting I don't think anybody could ever tell that you're playing through a Kemper, but it's just something that I've noticed over the years, even using either in-ear monitors or playing through a house or going through my cab. There's a certain consistency which is good, but again also is kind of unique. So again, maybe somebody in the comments hopefully can agree with me on that and let me know your thoughts down below. My last big dislike with the Kemper is mostly because whenever I'm using it, I'm using the performance option. Right now, the way it's set up is you have a bank of 125 different performances that really, in a live situation, you can't go from one end to the other very quickly. Which some people will say in the comments, okay, just go into Rig Manager and customize your set for that week and just have them all in a row. I think that definitely works. In my opinion, I'd really like some sort of like folder and subfolder system where you have the ability to create different set lists within your performance. Click into that and then it's got your 5-10 different performances for that set list, bank out, and then you could go into maybe a different set list or whatever it may be. I've mentioned this in other like groups before, Facebook groups, and honestly I think I'm probably the only one that really feels this way, but just something that I personally think and have kind of come into play as I've used this amp over the last several years. That's a pretty short list of dislikes. Now I can obviously go in and I could be really nitpicky, or I could find something that somebody else has said and disliked about the Kemper, but all in all, honestly, my experience has been very positive while owning this amp. And now the nice thing, like I said before, I was constantly tone searching before I owned the Kemper. Now I can spend all that extra money on guitars, which who doesn't love more guitars? To land this plane, I think that the Kemper is one of the most incredible pieces of technology to date. I think it sounds absolutely incredible, and I think for me personally, it's a miracle to say after all these years, I still really enjoy plugging in my guitar and playing through the system. Now, if you're looking to get into the Kemper Verse, or if you already own one and just reconfirming your existing bias, please check out some of my other content, my other videos, like, subscribe, share this. That helps me out quite a bit. But for now, stay tuned. See you later.